just go way back in history and start with the first thing that I know that happened in that area, and that was the massacre of the Hillaby tribes, and by Andrew Jackson's men. Well, actually, yes, it was the men in Andrew Jackson's,
Unit.
control, but yeah, but it was actually another general that gave the order for the Indians to be massacred. And the sad thing was, is the Hillary tribes had already surrendered, and they had sent a messenger to Andrew Jackson who accepted their surrender. And so the Native Americans thought they were on peaceful terms. So when they saw this other general coming in with his men, they thought it was time to celebrate, and they were coming to become, they were going to be peaceful, and, be friends now. And so the women and children ran out to greet the soldiers as they rode in on their horses. And so they were the first ones to be slaughtered. And they were just, being taken down as they came up to them. And then they rounded up all the men and, murdered the majority of them as well. They
Hmm.
burned the villages. And it was just really sad that the message didn't get to all of the generals in time to stop that from happening. That one general who was responsible for that particular massacre was just so dead set on having his moment of glory. He was tired of Andrew Jackson getting you know,
Yes.
all the attention in the press, and so he really jumped the gun. And so that was one of the first things that happened that I'm aware of in this area. And then fast forward to the 1970s, to modern day, and in the house in Rockford, next door was a man who moved in with um, his second wife, and he had been suspected of killing his first wife. And even though it went to trial, they weren't able to get the conviction, but she had been found beaten and strangled in her car on the side of the road. And they had been married for 20 years. And they had two kids, and when all this happened. And so he had, you know, gone through this murder trial, and his next door neighbor at the time had seen something the night that his first wife was murdered, and she was going to testify against him at the trial. But sometime, it takes months before these murder trials come up on the docket at the courthouse. And so during that time where the prosecutors were gathering their evidence and building their case, the the Voodoo Preacher man had talked that star witness out of testifying against him and actually marrying him. So he married the star witness, the prosecution star witness, and they moved into this little house next to the Rockford house where this haunting later took place. But in the 1970s, he was suspected, the Voodoo Preacher was suspected of killing his first wife. His second wife, that star witness that I just spoke of, she was later, I don't think she made it a year, and she was found dead in her car on the side of the road. Um, and then her death was ruled accidental. It was staged to look like a car accident, but there was hardly any damage to the car. But because she had some kind of bronchial condition, like an asthma condition, they believe that she died of an asthma attack, but they weren't really sure. So her death was suspicious. Then a the Voodoo Preacher's brother was found dead in the road, not in a car, but he was just found dead in the road
Probably
nearby.
ran out of cars.
Right, they didn't want to mess up a car this time. He was found dead in the road, right near the houses, the Rockford house. Then a nephew of the Voodoo Preacher was found dead in his car on the side of the road. Very similar, manner of death, where it was staged to look like an accident. And he, every time someone would die, the voodoo preacher was getting insurance money.
Mhm.
And there was actually a case where the insurance company finally got tired of paying him insurance, the claims, and they actually took him to court because they didn't want to pay again because it just seemed so suspicious. But they lost, and they ended up having to pay the voodoo preacher the insurance money. So he had netted like over $100,000 in insurance money over the course of, you know, 6 or 7 years, of all these people in his family dying mysteriously. And the last death that really broke the camel, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, was the voodoo preacher had married his third wife. How he convinced another woman to marry him, I don't know.
He
But
had to be good. Smooth
yeah,
talker.
very persuasive. But his third wife had an adopted daughter who was about 15 years old. And she was found dead on the side of the road underneath the car, and it had been staged to look like she had had a flat tire and was trying to change it, and the car fell on her neck. Like the tireless rim of the car fell on her neck. But it would later be found through forensic and through the autopsy that she was dead before she was ever placed under the car. So they knew that was an actual murder. It was an accident. So when she died, everyone in town already had suspected the voodoo preacher of being involved in these suspicious deaths. And this one was just the clincher. They just knew that he was responsible. The town was in an uproar. They were so scared of this guy that they wouldn't even look him in the eye if they came across him, when they crossed paths on the sidewalk in town. Everyone was too afraid to speak out or testify against him because he was purportedly a voodoo practitioner, and he could curse you or, put a hex on you or, whatever. And people were very afraid of that. And so they wouldn't come out and speak against him. But this time it was just too much. He had supposedly killed this young girl, and the young girl's uncle was furious. He just knew that the voodoo preacher had done this to her. He just knew that, he'd been getting away with it for all these years, and he was just done. So the day of the girl's funeral, the uncle is, getting ready. And he talks about how he's getting dressed, and he just feels infuriated that he's having to go to his niece's funeral. And he just puts a Beretta handgun in his pocket and to go to the funeral. And he doesn't really know why he's doing that. He's just really mad. And the voodoo preacher had the gall, the guts to show up at at his niece's
See, that
funeral.
just astounds me.
hmm And when everyone in town knew that he probably had something to do with it, he comes into the funeral home and sits right behind the uncle. And the uncle doesn't realize it right away, but as they're getting up and viewing the body and coming back to sit down, he sees the voodoo preacher sitting in the pew directly behind him. He sits down, and just a second later, he just snaps and he pulls that gun out of his pocket. He whirls around and he shoots the voodoo preacher 3 times in the forehead in the middle of this funeral. And people are
I did
jumping
not
out of
know it
the
was the forehead.
Yes, they were jumping. People were jumping out of the windows of the funeral home. They said, trying to get out of the way because of the gunfire. And eyewitnesses that saw this take place said that the voodoo preacher actually didn't slump over right away. He pulled a white handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed his forehead, the blood on his forehead before he actually slumped over dead. But the uncle waited there for the police. His brother was a sheriff's officer, and his brother sat there with him until the authorities backup arrived, and he, you know, didn't didn't try to deny what he had just done in front of 300 witnesses.
Right.
And but his case went to trial, and he actually um, got off the hook from having to do any time for the murder of the voodoo preacher. And I really think that's because, the town was just so relieved that he had done what no one else could do, is, bring justice to that family and get rid of a problem that was so disturbing in their community. So when my client moved into this house in Rockford, she had no idea of this history. She had no idea she was moving in next door to the Voodoo Preacher's house and she had no idea that all these people had been found dead all around this little area. And she had no idea that the Voodoo Preacher and 4 of his victims were all buried in the cemetery that was practically across the street from the house. And so when she moves into this house, they immediately start having strange activity. There's, figure of a man in the window that really freaked her out. There's people, she can hear somebody walking around in the upstairs of her home when she's all alone or just there with her 2-year-old daughter. So constant bug infestations. Something happened to the dog, which was really sad. And they actually found its body, mutilated, where someone had taken its heart from its
Yeah.
body, killed it. Really bad electrical issues in the house. One day she came home to find the intercom radio system inside the house, it's a house from the 70s, blaring like death metal rock music, and she couldn't turn it off and she couldn't turn it down. She ended up having to like pull the wires out, pull it out of the wall to make it stop. She just had all these very uncomfortable things happening in the home, and it just kind of built up to one night where something manifests in her room, and she ends up having a sleep paralysis episode, and she sees this creature crawl into the bed with her, and it tries to suffocate her. And, and when it's done with her, it turns and kind of communicates to her telepathically that it's going to go after her daughter now too, and who was only, she wasn't even 2 years old yet, but she was still in her crib, and she was asleep down the hall. And by the time my client Jenny finally got her feeling back in her body and she was able to sit up, she was just sitting there on the edge of the bed trying to gather her senses and, understand what just happened. And she hears her daughter shrieking out of terror, in her bedroom. And so she grabs her husband. They rush in there to see if she's okay. So this entity and all these things that were going on in the house just really terrorized her and her family for about 6 months. That's as long as they could take it. And they
You know
moved
what?
out.
I'm going to stop you because I have another
Okay.
question about this, but
Okay.
we're on our last break. So
All
this
right.
is only 2 minutes, y'all. Don't give up. We'll be right back and you can hear the rest of this.